There's this moment in healing where the silence becomes peaceful instead of heavy. It's not immediate. At first, the silence is deafening. You wonder if you're heartless. Wonder if maybe they're right, maybe you are too distant, too dramatic, too cold. But then it settles. And for the first time in your life, you're able to hear yourself think. You can recognize your own voice, not filtered through guilt, fear, or family's twisted expectations. That's where I am now. I don't hate them, not anymore. Hatred, after all, still gives someone space in your head. What I feel now is detachment, like I've floated beyond their reach, like they can't hurt me anymore. But the road here wasn't easy. It was my 24th birthday when I got the next surprise. Not from them, no, from myself. I made a decision. I was going to write it all down. Not for revenge, not to shame anyone, but because I needed to give myself the validation they never would. I needed to tell my story as truthfully as possible. No edits, no euphemisms, no excuses. I called it The Girl Who Wasn't Protected. A personal memoir just for me. Page after page poured out of me like blood from a reopened wound. The first time Ryan broke something I loved. The last time my mother looked at me like I mattered. Every twisted comment, every lonely night. But the most painful chapter to write was titled, When I Realized She Knew. Because that was the moment I couldn't deny it anymore. My mother knew what was happening. She saw the bruises, heard the insults, witnessed the fear, and she chose to stay silent. That wasn't ignorance. It was betrayal. Eventually, I met someone. His name was Jonah. We met at a bookstore. Of all places, both reaching for the same out-of-print psychology memoir. I laughed. He let me have it, and then asked if I wanted coffee. At first, I didn't know how to open up. I was so used to hiding parts of myself, to being the quiet one, the safe one. But Jonah had this calmness to him, like nothing I said could scare him away. Like he saw me, not the version I'd become for survival, but the real me. On our third date, I told him everything. About Ryan. About my mom. About how I left and never looked back. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't give me some canned family speech. He just said, "You were a child. You didn't deserve that. And I'm so glad you left." No one had ever said that to me before. I cried right there at the cafe table. But for once, it wasn't from pain, it was from relief. A few months later, my mom tried one more time. This time, it was a letter. Handwritten. 5 pages long. She apologized. Said she was sorry for not protecting me. Said she didn't know how to handle Ryan, and that she was scared of him too. In her own way. She admitted she minimized my pain. That she thought ignoring it was easier than facing the truth. But then came the pivot I was dreading. I still hope you'll come home someday. He's changed. He's seeing someone now. Maybe we can have a family dinner and start over. There it was again. The invitation to erase the past. She wanted to skip the part where accountability lived and jump straight to reunion. She wanted me to swallow it all and come back smiling. And as much as that letter tugged at the softest parts of me, I couldn't do it. Because her apology, while appreciated, still centered him. Still prioritized family unity over individual truth. She wanted to fix the family image more than the family wounds. I wrote her back. 1 page. It read, "I appreciate your letter. I believe you mean what you said. But healing for me means distance. I'm no longer willing to be in the same space as someone who never acknowledged what he did. If you ever truly want to rebuild, it starts with truth. Not dinners, not smiles, truth. Until then, I wish you peace. But I'm protecting mine." I never got a reply. And that's okay. Because I didn't write it to restart anything. I wrote it to end something. Years passed. I finished my degree. Got engaged. Moved into a tiny but warm apartment with Jonah. Built friendships that felt like home. Started teaching creative writing to high schoolers who reminded me so much of me. Quiet, nervous, desperate to be seen. One student, after class one day, said, "You always look like you know what we're feeling." I smiled. I remember what it was like to not be heard. So now I make it a point to listen. That student never knew how much that meant to me. Because in that moment, I realized the little girl who once counted ceiling tiles to survive. She grew up. And she didn't just escape, she built a life. One night, I saw Ryan's name trending locally on social media. It turned out he'd been arrested during a bar fight. I saw the mugshot, the anger in his eyes. The same look he used to give me when I dared to exist too loudly. For a moment, my stomach twisted. Old trauma. But then nothing. Just emptiness. And it felt good. Because I wasn't responsible for him anymore. I wasn't responsible for my mother's choices either. I had carried that guilt like a second skin for so long. And now, finally, it had shed itself. I didn't call. I didn't write. I just moved on. Jonah and I got married on a crisp autumn afternoon. We invited 40 people, friends, mentors, co-workers, the family I chose. Not one blood relative came, and I didn't feel sad. I felt safe. My maid of honor, Maya, the same friend who once showed me what a real sibling relationship looked like, stood beside me in tears. You did it, she whispered. You broke the cycle. I did. I really did. Now, years later, I occasionally get emails from distant relatives who saw old Facebook posts and wonder what happened. Why aren't you around anymore? Your mom misses you. Sometimes I tell them the truth. Other times I just say, we grew apart. Because not everyone deserves access to your pain. Some people only want enough of your story to make themselves comfortable, not enough to understand you. And that's okay. Because I'm not telling my story to them. I'm telling it to the little girl who thought no one would ever believe her. I'm telling it to anyone else who was bullied in their own home and told to just let it go. And I'm telling it to myself every time doubt creeps in that leaving wasn't betrayal. It was freedom. I never thought my truth would cost me my family. Growing up, I learned early on that silence was survival. My father, Daniel West, was respected by the community, charming, generous, the kind of man people called a pillar. But behind closed doors, he was someone else entirely. To the world, he was a hero. To me, he was a storm. Our home looked picture perfect on the outside, a large 2-story colonial, white picket fence, manicured lawn, and my mother's flower beds blooming every spring. But on the inside, there was an unspoken rule. Don't make him angry. That meant tiptoeing, lying, pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. I have 2 younger brothers, Ethan and Jake. They idolized Dad. He coached their soccer teams, taught them how to build birdhouses, and always brought them souvenirs from his business trips. He treated them like golden sons. Me? I was the invisible daughter. My mom, Claire, was the perfect hostess and peacemaker. She believed in keeping the peace at all cost, even if it meant ignoring bruises on my arm or the look in my eyes after another one of Dad's rages. It's just how he is, she'd whisper. Don't push him. I started keeping a journal at age 9, not because I was particularly introspective, but because I needed a place to pour the words I wasn't allowed to say out loud. It was the only space that belonged to me. I wrote about the nights I hid in my closet while my father screamed about the dinner being cold. I wrote about the time he threw a plate against the wall because I got a B+ in math. I even wrote about the time he made me sit at the dinner table for hours until I apologized for rolling my eyes. He never hit me in places anyone could see. My brothers never believed me. Ethan once told me, "You're too sensitive." Jake, always quieter, would just shake his head and change the subject. I wanted so badly for them to see. But they were. To deepen the illusion, I left home at 18, the day after graduation. No hugs, no goodbye dinner, just a slammed door and the sound of my mother crying in the kitchen. I moved across the state, supported myself through college, and eventually built a life where I could breathe. Therapy helped me unravel the knots he tied inside me, and for once, I felt free. Years passed with minimal contact, phone calls on holidays, and occasional email from Mom asking if I'd come around for a birthday or dinner. I always said, no. Then 3 months ago, I got the call. Dad collapsed in the driveway, my mom said, her voice low and shaky. Massive heart attack. He didn't make it. I was silent. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Grief, relief, guilt for the relief. I hung up and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. Then I cried, not for him, but for all the pain he left behind. The funeral was scheduled for the following Saturday. My first instinct was to stay away, but something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the part of me that still craved acknowledgement, or maybe it was just the years of silence weighing heavy on my chest. I told my therapist, I want to speak at the funeral. I need to. She didn't stop me. She just said, then, speak your truth, but be ready for what comes after. I arrived at the church alone. Everyone else was in black, murmuring condolences, handing tissues to my mother, hugging my brothers. I stood to the side, like an outsider at my own family's ceremony. My father's photo sat on an easel at the front of the room. It was one of his favorites, him in a suit, smiling wide, a man of importance. I stared at it, thinking he always knew how to put on a show. The eulogies began. Ethan spoke first, voice steady, talking about how Dad taught him discipline and strength. Jake followed, quieter, talking about fishing trips and how Dad always made time. My mother cried silently, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief as the pastor spoke of legacy, of devotion, of a life well lived. Then they opened the floor. My heart pounded as I stood up. I heard a few murmurs. One woman even whispered, "Is that his daughter?" Like I was some ghost who had wandered into the wrong funeral. I walked to the podium, gripping the paper I had folded and unfolded 100 times. My voice trembled, at first, but then it steadied. "I'm Emily," I began, "Daniel's daughter." I looked out at the sea of familiar, judgmental faces. My mother stared at her lap. Ethan's jaw was clenched. Jake wouldn't meet my eyes. "I know most of you knew my father as a strong man, a leader, a friend, someone who loved his family." Pause. "But that's not the man I knew." You could have heard a pin drop. I took a shaky breath and continued. "To me, he was a man of silence. Not the quiet kind, but the kind that crushes you when you're young and afraid. My father taught me fear before he ever taught me love. He controlled every part of our house, the air, the light, the sound. I learned not to speak unless spoken to. I learned that pleasing him was the only way to be safe." Someone gasped. Another whispered, "What is she doing?" "I've carried this truth for years," I went on. "Because when you tell the truth about someone people admire, you become the villain. But I'm not here to tarnish a memory. I'm here because I deserve to be seen. I'm here because silence nearly broke me. My hands were shaking, but I kept going. I left home to survive. Not because I was rebellious or dramatic or ungrateful, but because staying meant losing who I was. I know this may not be what you came to hear, but I couldn't stand here today and pretend." I looked directly at my mother. "I needed you to protect me, and you didn't." A sob escaped her lips, but she didn't look up. I closed my speech with a quiet sentence, "May he rest in peace, and may I finally find mine." Then I stepped down. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one clapped. No one moved. I sat, alone in the back row, my face burning. After the service, people avoided my gaze like I was contagious. A few came up to whisper that I was brave, but even their praise felt rehearsed, something they'd forget the moment they got back to their cars. My brothers didn't speak to me. My mother walked right past me without a glance. It was like I had ceased to exist. That night, I got a message from Ethan. "You had no right to do that. You embarrassed us. Stay away from this family." Then Jake sent one. "I don't know what happened between you and Dad, but airing it like that, you ruined his funeral." My mother followed with a simple text, "Don't come back." And just like that, I was disowned. Not because I hurt them, but because I refused to lie for them anymore. After the funeral, the world moved on, but I was stuck in a strange kind of emotional limbo. I hadn't just buried a father, I had buried any remaining thread that connected me to my family. They didn't grieve me. They exiled me. In the days that followed, I received no calls, no attempts at reconciliation. My inbox was filled only with messages from extended relatives, some laced with passive-aggressive pity, others soaked in venom. One aunt called me a disgrace. Another cousin said I should have waited until after the funeral to deal with my trauma. I remember staring at those words, my hands trembling in disbelief. I thought I was doing something honest, brave, even. But apparently, bravery comes with a cost. No one warns you about loneliness. I tried to go back to my life. I had a decent job in marketing and a small but cozy apartment filled with plants. I kept alive longer than any relationship. But now, everything felt hollow. I couldn't focus at work. I couldn't sleep without dreaming about that moment. At the podium, the rage on my brother's face, the cold finality in my mother's silence. For a while, I questioned myself. Was I wrong? Had I gone too far? Then I opened my journal, the same one I'd kept since I was 9. The pages were yellowed, but every word was there. I read entries I had forgotten about, nights I cried myself to sleep. Days I faked being sick to avoid Dad's wrath, moments of deep, painful isolation that no child should ever feel. I wasn't wrong, and I wasn't crazy. Still, being cut off from your own blood feels like being erased. One evening, I found myself driving by my childhood home. I told myself I was just taking the long way home. But deep down, I knew I wanted to see it again, to see if it looked different now that he was gone. The house looked the same shutters, same white fence, same flower beds, but it felt dead, like all the performance had been drained out of it. There were cars in the driveway, Ethan's truck, Jake's SUV. They had all gathered, probably to console Mom, maybe even to decide what to do with Dad's belongings. I didn't stop. I just sat across the street for a few minutes and cried. Weeks passed. Life resumed its normal rhythm. I worked. I ate alone. I watered my plants. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't unsee the truth of who my family really was. And yet, despite everything, I still mourn them, not the people they were, but the family I had wished they'd been. One day, I got a call from my cousin Lily. She was one of the few family members I'd remained close with, though even she had grown distant since the funeral. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have reached out sooner." I swallowed hard. "It's okay." "No, it's not. I was there, at the funeral. I heard what you said. And it made me remember things I'd buried too." My heart skipped. Lily's dad, my uncle, was Dad's younger brother. She told me stories I never knew. About how Dad would berate her mother at family dinners when no one else was listening. About how he'd once grabbed Lily's arm so hard at a reunion that she had bruises for a week because she spilled juice on his shoes. "We all looked up to him," she said. "But I think we all knew something wasn't right." That conversation was the first time I didn't feel completely alone. A few days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. A real letter, handwritten, sealed, no return address. My stomach twisted as I opened it. It was from Jake. "Emily, I've been thinking a lot since the funeral. At first, I was furious. You shattered everything we built around Dad's memory. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized we didn't build that memory. He did. I remember the night he yelled at you because you dropped a glass. You were shaking so bad you couldn't even speak. I told myself it was a one-time thing. But it wasn't, was it? I'm sorry. I don't know what else to say. I don't know how to make it right. But I see you now. I believe you." Jackie cried reading that letter. For the first time, someone in my family had acknowledged the truth. And still, it didn't change everything. Jake hadn't spoken to Mom or Ethan about writing to me. He said they wouldn't understand. That they were still clinging to the image of Dad, the hero, the provider, the strong man. Jake told me he felt stuck, torn between the family that raised him and the truth that was now undeniable. I didn't expect forgiveness. I didn't even expect reconciliation. But Jake's letter gave me something I hadn't felt in weeks: validation. Eventually, I began sharing my story, first anonymously in a support forum for adult survivors of family trauma, then more openly. The responses poured in. People who had been disbelieved, people who had been disowned, people who had spoken their truth only to be abandoned by the ones who were supposed to love them most. One woman wrote, "Your words were like reading my own thoughts. I've never told anyone what my father did, but maybe now I can." Another wrote, "Thank you for saying what so many of us are afraid to. You were brave. You still are." And that's when I realized something. My story wasn't just mine. It was ours. All of us who had been silenced, who had played along to keep the peace, who had paid the price for telling the truth. About a month after the funeral, I got another message, this time from my mother. It was short. "He's gone. What's the point of reopening wounds? We all have our ways of coping. Yours hurt everyone. Let it go." I didn't reply, because here's the thing. I wasn't reopening wounds. I was cleaning them out. I was choosing healing over hiding. I didn't expect my mother to understand. She had built her entire life around protecting the image of our family. For her, silence was survival. For me, it had nearly been the death of me. Sometimes love means protecting people. Other times, it means letting them go. Still, Jake and I began talking more often. Not every day, and not always about heavy stuff. Sometimes we talked about movies, or shared childhood memories that made us laugh. Slowly, we rebuilt something, not the relationship we had as kids, but something new. Something honest. He eventually told me he was considering therapy. That he'd been thinking about how our father's temper shaped more than just me, it shaped all of us. Even Ethan, who now carried that same explosive energy in his own parenting. "Do you think he'll ever see it?" I asked. Jake sighed. "He doesn't want to. That's the difference. You wanted the truth. He wants comfort." And I understood. Some people will do anything to protect a lie, because the truth would force them to see themselves and the people they love in ways they're not ready to. As time passed, the ache of being disowned dulled. Not because I stopped missing my family, but because I started creating my own. I surrounded myself with people who didn't require me to hide, friends who listened without judgment, colleagues who respected me, a community who saw value in vulnerability. I also kept writing. The same words that got me disowned were now helping others heal. I posted essays. I did a podcast interview. I spoke at a small local event for survivors of emotional abuse. And every time I shared my story, the burden felt lighter. People still ask me, "Would you do it again?" My answer was always the same. Yes. Because pretending he was something he wasn't would have kept me imprisoned in that same house of silence. And I refused to live in shadows anymore. But healing isn't a straight line. Sometimes I still dream about him. Sometimes I hear his voice in the back of my head when I make a mistake, whispering, "You'll never be enough." But now, I talk back. Now, I know better.